a little inappropriate to play MWR while talking about my dead fish, but uh, I'm gonna. I've already decided that I'm going to release a separate, more serious video addressing the matter, but I'm too tired to do that at this time. You know, this this is like one last massive trial almost has ended. One chapter of my life has now been concluded. I don't know how I should feel about that. You know, now I have other fish to tend to, and that sounds very. It sounds very fucked up. It really, truly does. But the truth of the matter is, Arthur was one of the main fish in the tank. Truly, the tank centered around Arthur. He was the most important fish in this tank. Um, Now, granted, again, I still have two other fish in this tank. You know what I mean? And just, just because Arthur is gone does not mean that they're not as valuable or, vice versa. I'm not going to give up on the hobby. These are living creatures, when you buy fish, um, you are essentially tending to and taking care of living organisms. All right, and I think that's why emotionally I feel, uh, quite, quite upset about the matter. To put it into layman's terms, I quite frankly I don't know how else to feel, other than upset. Okay, like these fish, like they're animals. They can't communicate to us. I did everything I could in this situation to save Arthur. I did the fish CPR, the compressions. I did everything that I could do in my power as just a novice owner of fish. So I've never encountered this situation before. Um, and I think a lot of it is my lack of expertise in the field that caused me not to be able to respond in the correct manner to save Arthur. Once, you know, I've never done fish CPR. He was almost came back, but he went back into shock, and that was the last time. He did come back at one point, almost. I don't know how else to describe it. I felt movement. I felt like he was trying to, but he couldn't come through. Unfortunately, he couldn't. He was old too. He was basically fully grown when I got him, and I had him for about 2.5 years now. So, I mean, he was getting really old, and so maybe when I put him in the quarantine tank, I didn't give him enough time to completely acclimate to it, and that's what caused him to go into shock. So, in a lot of ways, I feel responsible for the whole ordeal. And the ramifications of that has got me greatly disturbed. I would hate to believe that I am responsible for Arthur's death. Um, but it is unlike me to try to shift the blame or try to excuse anything that I may have done wrong. Uh, you know, uh, Granted, a lot of people might look at the situation and say, "Well, it's a fish. Get over it." This fish was more than just a fish to me. This was my pet. This was my little bundle of joy in a lot of ways. When I lost my father, uh, this pet fish was all I really had. You know what I mean? I had a great, loving, supporting family. I had friends, but you know, at the time, ever since I was a little kid, I've always been fascinated and delighted at aquatic life. Um, so collecting, like wanting to get fish or, you know, keeping a big aquarium has always kind of been something I wanted to do. And so starting from buying a cheap fish tank, a little 1.5 gallon fish tank is what we started with Arthur. And, you know, he's just in my room watching me playing video games. And, you know, he moved with me. That was a huge emotional support, as many people might laugh at that, you know. I've never moved in my life. I've never had to move in my life. I've never wanted to move in my life, but I moved, okay, into this apartment that I'm in right now. And that was a huge, huge part of my growth as an individual, as a person. So, this little fish was with me the whole way through it. The whole year I spent by myself in my apartment, you know. So, I might not have had a girlfriend, I might not have had a roommate, but I had a fish, and I'm grateful that I had him for so long. You know, and again, you know, he might have just died of old age. I'm not a veterinarian that specializes in fish, so I couldn't diagnose the situation, but I do feel like I am at fault for not responding accordingly. I feel like a lot of that has to do with me taking him out of the main tank to put him into a separate tank, and I didn't give him enough time to acclimate. Just because he was struggling to move, like he was just floating at times in the tank, like, you know, like he wasn't swimming. And when I went to feed him, and this has been ongoing for a couple weeks now, and that is the fact that you know, he hasn't been eating, he hasn't been trying to, you know, do anything. He's just sort of been hiding and staying away from the other fish. His started losing a little bit of coloration. Um, his pretty blues and stuff like that. He was losing some color, and you know, things just weren't looking good for him. And so, you know, I think it was just his time, and unfortunately, I accelerated that by my dumbass putting him in a different tank, a quarantine tank, if you will. If he had some kind of disease, the other fish didn't have it because, you know, it would suggest something with the water quality. Now, to be fair, I haven't changed the tank. The way that my tank is set up, it's a 10-gallon tank with what do you call it? It's got mostly snails and just algae-eating fish. These are really easy to take care of, a pleco and a loach. But the loach well, I think it's a chain loach is what it's referred to. But yeah, no, I firmly believe that I do firmly believe it is 99%. Well, I think it is completely my fault, and it's hard to really accept that. And Unfortunately, I have to accept reality. The reality is he's gone. Um, and you know, he was getting old. You know, it was coming around that time, and so I think, you know, him living the first year of his life in a 1 gallon tank, you know, remember, this is my first real fish ever having. So when I was overfeeding him a little bit, I sort of got into a routine of feeding him at night. So he went through multiple different feeding schedules. I live fed him, you know, you know, a few little mistakes like not changing the water perfectly on time. So you know, he survived all my fucking bullshit. And until I started becoming a more intermediate owner of a fish, you know, where I started really taking it seriously and cleaning the tank and maintaining everything and checking the pH levels. It's he didn't have the luxury of someone with knowledge at first, you know. He had a beginner. So every mistake I made was going to be my first mistake and probably not my last. But you know, his tough ass survived, man, all my bullshit. And unfortunately, I think he was dying in the tank. I pulled him out of the tank to put him in a different one to sort of watch and monitor him to make sure, you know, he can handle it. You know, like he can take food and stuff like that, because you know it's like the other fish are eating his food. He's not trying to eat his food. And I think the stress of being moved around into a different tank combined with not being able to acclimate to the water just caused him to go into shock. And unfortunately, when I had initially almost revived him, it's just he went back into shock. And unfortunately, at that point in time, it was just, you know. But I don't know. I'm not an expert. I only know what happened. Um, and all I know is that he did not survive uh, the rescue attempt. So it doesn't leave much other alternative options, you know. But so I buried him. I um, I put him in the pond, uh, about 3 minutes away from my apartment that I always go to and always walk by, so that every time I walk by the pond, I know that Arthur is resting in peace. Um, and it sucks to me because I know other fish are going to eat him, but you know, in a lot of ways, his spirit. I don't know if animals have spirits or not. I'm not. You know, I've spoken to Native Americans that believe that that animals have spirits, but you know, again, I don't know for sure. You know, I'm no expert in spiritual matters. You know, I said my last prayer and put him in the pond, and that was the last that I seen of him. His scales were badly decomposing. Um, so I picked him up with a napkin, and his napkin is stained with his scales, whatever was left of him. And the Tupperware used to transport him, I scooped up with that same napkin and put it into a Tic Tac container that I have labeled Arthur's remains. And it's the last thing I have of Arthur, and I'm holding on to those. Um, you know, that was a very special fish to me, man. And you know, it was just a little betta fish. You know, nothing too huge. Um, you know, I wonder why it won't let me go into a match. I think it's just the servers at this time at night are just so dead in our region, I think. Zero potential games found. It's crazy. I'm gonna have to just go into custom games, unfortunately, in a private match. I really wish Arthur didn't die. Like, I think any rational person wouldn't want that, you know. Though there are some people that are very cruel, and I hate cruel people. I really, truly do. I think animal cruelty is pure evil. I don't think. I know what I did was not cruelty, as it was in the intention of trying to save Arthur. I was not trying to kill Arthur. I was not trying to um, harm Arthur in any way. I was very careful in the transportation process of moving him from one tank to another. So, you know, I just, I really don't know, man. You know, it's, I know I keep saying I don't know, but it's like, I don't know how to feel. You know what I mean? I feel ashamed, embarrassed, in a lot of ways guilty, in a lot of ways sad, distraught. You know, that something that was living under my care has passed away. It's just not a fun thought to run by your head, that you might be responsible for the death of a living thing. And I don't think people understand the weight of that, because, you know, when you lose a pet, you know, it sucks. It really sucks, because, you know, you still build a connection with these animals, with these organisms, with these living beings. And, you know, regardless of what people say, you know, I don't think an animal's life is as valuable as a human's life by any stretch of the imagination. If a dog was drowning in a river and a baby or a child was drowning in the river, I would try and best of my ability to save both. But if I can only save one, if that's just the situation, they're at complete opposite ends, I'm going to save a child. You know what I mean? And I'd do it again. I would do it a million times, you know. It's a tough analogy. Because a poor dog is helpless, it's defenseless. But, it's, you know, it's... I don't know, it's animals definitely have agency. You know what I mean? They definitely have agency. They have intelligence, right? So an animal would never particularly... I mean, some animals are very unintelligent and they don't know better. But, like, you know, humans invented chocolate, you know what I mean? So a chocolate isn't... You're not going to find chocolate in the wilderness, you know? I mean, yes, everything on Earth is made from things on Earth. Like, you wouldn't have a fighter jet or these guns in this video game if it wasn't for the metals and the minerals in the Earth. So everything does come from the earth, everything is naturally made. Even if it seems unnatural, it is naturally made from things on the earth, because if they weren't of this earth, then they would be unnatural. Because, you know, it doesn't come from nature. So, I don't know what I'm trying to say, but what I'm trying to say is, like, no, animals wouldn't have the intelligence to build a fighter jet. A dog couldn't eat chocolate in the wilderness, you know what I mean? It could only eat what's available. Because humans made chocolate. Now they used, you know, things on the earth to make the chocolate, you know, cocoa beans or the process, or whatever the process is to make chocolate. Or, for instance, you know, like we used various chemicals, metals, tools to make these guns and these fighter jets and all this other shit. You know what I mean? It's like, so yeah, by no stretch of the imagination could a monkey muster the intelligence to do these things, you know what I mean, to make these things. But now it's just like, you know, so when people are like, yeah, animals, they don't get to choose or make choices, it's like, no, animals do. They get to choose what they eat. They get to choose when they sleep. They get to choose where they decide to nest or build a shelter. You know, animals have intelligence. You know, they don't do things because they just decided to do them. They do things because they have the intelligence to make a decisive decision. For instance, you know, it's like You know, Arthur is kind of the king of the tank. The other fish, they didn't decide to fuck with Arthur because, number one, alright, my clown Pleco has just, you know, he just eats algae. He doesn't really eat any of the flakes. He doesn't do the bloodworms. Now he, or, fucking, sorry, I'm stuttering here. My brain is stuttering. My brain is processing. Now the Pleco is not going to be eating the snails in the tank, but I've got a Coolie Loach, oh not a Coolie Loach, Chain Loach to eat the snails. Because they started overpopulating, so we needed a way to keep the population down. Now snails are replicating species, so they're asexual, so the thing is, it's like, they can easily start overpopulating your tank and take over. Like, believe it or not, months ago, I had like 1,000+ snails all clinged onto the rock, and you couldn't see that there was a rock. It looked like a giant snail army. And then Luna just started eating them one by one. And so then the snails started to hide and started to really figure out their place. That many snails was unwanted. I'm okay with this, a couple small snails. You know what I mean? And I really got snails because I bought my other fish from the same pet store, and they just got scooped in. So I accidentally brought home 1 or 2 snails, which hid. They found a good hiding spot that I didn't see them, and then they started to populate my tank, and then they started growing and getting to their adult size, which still isn't that big, but I would like to get a few more chain loaches so I can continue to keep the population low. The snails aren't really that great at cleaning the tank. They're good at cleaning like the rocks and the substrate, which is pretty good for tank maintenance and stuff. I don't know why this animation just doesn't seem realistic. Like, they have a Beretta M9 here. The hammer, it seems like the slide is moving before the hammer is in this animation. Whereas, like, the trigger is in single action mode. It's not a double action because the hammer is pre-cocked. So when I pull the trigger, my finger doesn't move at all. The hammer doesn't drop. Which, I mean, like, if you shoot it really fast, it gives off the illusion that it's going back and forth, but you really don't see it actuating properly. You know, they could have made this animation look 100 times better, in my opinion. Now, granted, my opinion means shit, I'm sure. Probably to a lot of people, my opinion means shit. You know what I mean? I'm just like, who am I? You know, I'm not a game developer. I don't know what it takes to make animation now. The 1911, on the other hand, it looks a lot better. Especially when aiming down sight, and you kind of see the hammer moving back and forth a little bit. Doesn't have enough travel distance to convince me that it's actually touching the firing pin. But, I mean, it's serviceable, I guess. You know, this game has this game is truly timeless. This is a timeless Call of Duty. The weapons look great. I gotta say, I gotta keep it honest here. The weapons look really great. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just trying to get my mind off of what happened. Like, it's not trauma. I'm not traumatized. Let me emphasize this really quickly. I'm not traumatized that my fish died or that I could be responsible. I feel like shit. You know what I mean? I'm a human being. I'm processing my emotions here. I'm processing how I should feel about the matter. You know what I mean? I'm a hunter. I love animals. I'm an animal lover, but I'm a hunter. You know what I mean? I do believe that even if I kill animals, right, like deer or, you know, game, you know, that I intend to eat, that I intend to process the food. I'm just one guy, so if I have extra food, I'll give it to friends and family and people that want it. And, I mean, it would be really cool if I start getting really into hunting and donate some of that meat to homeless shelters to feed homeless people or veterans in need, giving back to the community. That to me is the most honest way of doing it. We're not giving them money. I don't like giving homeless people money. I'll be honest with you. I'm kind of scummy. I don't like doing that. Just because I don't know why they're homeless. I don't know. And everyone has a different story, and you can't just trust everything you believe. So if you give them food, you're guaranteeing them sustenance. If they're not interested in the food, they're probably interested in something like drugs or alcohol. And that's probably the reason that they are homeless. So at that point, you'd just be enabling them. And, it's like, I think that, we should do more to help the homeless. But not in the sense of just giving them free shelter or giving them whatever. I mean, I'm talking like having rehabilitation programs for the homeless, people that really they want jobs, they don't want to do whatever, then they have to apply for it. They'd get housing, put them in a job, and they'd have to work this job for X amount of time. They'd have to do certain community work in addition to that, and that pays for their housing, and it sort of rehabilitates them, and we give them a credit card that they have to, a small credit card, like a $200 credit card, and they start rebuilding their credit, and then, they're, we tax them a little bit at a very small percentage, but now they might not have a car, they might not have a bazillion things, but you know what? They'd still have low-income government assistance helping them out in addition to what they're doing. So in a way, they're contributing. If some homeless people really can't, then, permanent government assistance, you know what I mean? But if we can get a lot of there's a lot of young teens and kids that are homeless. Because, like as a Christian, I really can't stand seeing other people treat the homeless like they're the plague. And as a tax-paying, patriotic American that can't stand bullshit, as a right-wing Republican, I can't stand the homeless just sitting around. Like, it's not the homeless, I can't stand the drug addicts. The zombies that walk the streets in the bad parts of town with no shirt on, and they're sagging their pants, they're walking weird, they're missing teeth. These people they lower property values. And it's just not good for anybody. I don't think so. I mean, there's definitely genuine homeless people out there. And, I mean, like, offering... I'm not a Democrat, mind you. So who's going to be paying for all this shit? Well, in a lot of ways that they're being taxed, they're paying for it themselves. You know what I mean? And they're contributing to community work in addition to that. And I'd say within the first couple months, they'd have to start maybe a part-time job or a full-time job. It's their choice wherever we decide to put them, right? Wherever they decide that they want to start. But sort of get them back into the workspace, get them used to working, and give them a monthly government allowance to purchase, like, for a haircut, and, like, governments would just donate, stuff like that, and then have them do community drives working, and, what I mean? Like, I feel like, dude, that, in theory, I'm sure it works perfectly. In execution, we'd have to see. I know that I have met some homeless people that I think would benefit from some kind of work or labor rehabilitation. Becoming a contributing member of society. I think, we are all humans, okay? And you gotta understand something. Animals don't pay for food, okay? We are the only species in the world that pay for food. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't pay for your McDonald's or your fucking shit. These are industries, okay? Which means they create jobs. Because this one product or thing exists, it creates jobs. So what does fast food create? Well, it creates cashiers, cooks, managers. It creates executives. It creates commercialing jobs. It creates fucking truck driver jobs, logistics department. People have to sell food, and somebody has to regulate this food to make sure it's safe to sell, which obviously they're not good at doing that, but we call these people the Drug and Food Administration, the FDA. So because these products and these services and these places exist, these people get to have a job. So in a lot of ways, the other crazy thing is this. Like farmers need, they need to grow crops and they need to sell stuff. So I mean, in a lot of ways, markets create multiple jobs to where multiple people get to benefit. This is why capitalism is such a great and beautiful thing. And when you can really see how many jobs one industry can create, like for instance, right? Say the clothing industry. Well, everyone needs clothes. So, everyone needs clothes to wear. Okay? Or say, you know what I mean? And so people have to have a place to sell them. You know what I mean? And it's just like places have to transport these clothing items. People have to. Some people might have clothing repair shops, where they might knit or not knit, but sew jeans back together or whatnot. So you've created like 10 or 15 jobs from one thing. All right, these jobs all center around one thing: guns. Okay, and there has to be a store to sell them. There has to be a place to shoot them. There has to be companies that manufacture ammo. There has to be people to assemble the guns. There has to be people that can transport the guns. There has to be, people that can train people how to shoot guns. You know what I mean? There has to be ammo and gun cleaning stuff, which allows companies to create these additional products to sell in your regular retail stores like Walmart or Meijer or Cabela's or Tractor Supply Company. And then on top of that, some people need a place to store their guns, so there are safe companies, and you might have to have a holster to put on your gun, or you might have a holster to put your gun in, so there are holster companies. There are companies that make all kinds of cool gadgets to put on your guns, like scopes, lasers, flashlights, larger magazines, different furniture. So you have all these different brands making parts and stuff for your guns, and then on top of all that, you gotta have targets. So some companies make paper targets. See what I'm saying? It's like, think about how many different jobs that everyone has to do to keep all these different industries and businesses running, and it's all just around guns. Alright? So just think about that for a second, guys. That's the beauty of capitalism. Cars. Has to be mechanics, marketing department. There has to be factory workers willing to work this shit. Now again, we've unfortunately in these industries we're replacing people with robots, and that to me is evil, and that should be outlawed. I don't care about how you can call me a dirty communist. I don't care. Robots do not have families to feed. People do. We need jobs. And ultimately speaking, guns are the #1 product manufactured in America, other than cars. And a lot of these cars, some of the parts and some of the components are outsourced to be made in Mexico and Canada and all over the world. So even our American car brands aren't exactly all American. I mean, where do you think we're getting all the chips to put in these cars and all this other technology crap? You know what I mean? It's crazy. But every industry develop, like the entertainment industry, the broadcasting in general, emergency services, all these different cornerstones, all these different things creates a economy. So, the United States has built itself off of several different industries, household appliance industries, cleaning industry, vacuums, cleaning products, safe chemicals, cleaning solvents, other crap. The automotive industry, the manufacturing industries to manufacture parts and stuff. You know what I mean? When automotives took off, rubber went up exponentially. Well, everyone needs tires. Everyone goes through tires, so we need someone to make tires. So, there are tons of rubber factories that smell like absolute shit, but they make a lot of money selling tires. And so these tire manufacturers like Pirelli and Toyo and Firestone and Michelin and Goodyear and um, there are so many other different tire companies out there, but those are some big names. These guys get to make a calendar, and they get to make commercials, and they get to sell these to retailers like Grismore or wherever you buy tires from. And then there has to be people to install it. So it creates a multitude of different businesses and companies. So it's like these different industries do different things and collaborate in different ways. And it's just such a beautiful thing when you see it really in the process of working. Like when you move into an area, okay, and you see a lot of something in that area. Like if you go to Detroit, you're going to see a lot of Ford and GM in Detroit. Detroit's known as Motor City. Michigan in general, and I live in Ohio. The Midwest was an industrial center. But if you move into a small rural town and say, I don't know, Idaho or Texas, you're going to see a lot of farms. You're going to see a lot of agriculture. And a lot of people's mindset is around that. Geographics, the land in the area is good for farming these types of crops. It's a environmentally rich area for these kind of crops. And so this is what they farm. But it's like, well, say Michigan in the Midwest, right? We'll just say the Midwest is a massive industrial center. A lot of industrialization. There's some agriculture here, all right? In Ohio, there are tons of cornfields, but Ohio's got kind of a bit of everything. The birthplace of aviation. And, you'll notice this, but in Ohio in particular, there are lots, and I mean like lots, of like aviation companies are headquartered here in Ohio. I've seen lots of their factories and warehouses and shit. It's crazy to me, quite frankly. But you know, trains are still used today. I don't think people realize how valuable trains are. But they move heavy shit that semis can't move. And I mean, you think about it, a train is faster than a semi-truck. It's less convenient, but it's faster. It's more direct. You see, because when you put something on a semi-truck, he's got to go through traffic. There are constant like backups on the highway, constant bullshit. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, the truck driving in general is not a bad thing by any stretch of the way. But what I'm saying is this: it's when you have a direct route that is point A to point B on a rail, this is the only way you're going. It's moving on its own. And I mean, some of these trains get up pretty freaking quick, and it's a constant speed. It doesn't have to stop for anything. It can't get pulled over. You know what I mean? So these trains just go from point A to point fucking B. Literally, just from point A to point B. So, to me, it's kind of amazing in a lot of ways. Because, we see these, now trucks can do things, or semi-trucks can do things that trains obviously cannot, and that's getting live loaded onto a dock door, going into, you know what I mean? So it's like they go into these warehouses and get freight offloaded instantly. You know what I mean? A train has to go to different ports and stuff like that. But if these trains and planes, because some stuff comes in via plane like FedEx and shit like that, it's like it's crazy. And thinking about like logistics, transportation, the um, federal mail system, like the whole, the mail. You know what I mean? It's like to me, it's absolutely crazy how much thought really truly goes into all this shit and how complex it all really is. And it is very complex by every stretch of the imagination. Is transportation and logistics a complete, and I mean a completely advanced nightmare? I say nightmare jokingly, but I'm very serious at the same time. Like, it is a nightmare at times having to call like a shipping and receiving department, and places have to have appointment numbers and bill of ladings and shit like that. Like, it's very advanced. It's very advanced shit. But there's some people that don't even know what bill of ladings are or what they mean. The packing numbers, SKU codes and shit like that. Like if you really think about it, like it is a very very crazy world to be a part of. I think anyway. Like, I think it's crazy. But I'm always proud to do my part in this crazy crazy world we live in. I keep forgetting I have Arctic Wolf. Alright, guys. Have a good one and peace out.